So, when we hear the word Jericho in the Bible, what's the first story we think about, right? What? Jericho. Right, I hear you like mumbling. Joanne, you can be louder than that. I saw you say the right word. Right, the walls come tumbling down. That's the big dramatic story we all learned in Sunday school, right? We got to do it, and it was when we got to fall down on the floor and get all dirty, right? But this is another story about Jericho, and Jericho was on the way from Galilee to Jerusalem. And so hear this story of Jesus. We're in Lent, so we're heading toward Jerusalem. And this is a story that occurred on the way from Mark's 10th chapter. They came to Jericho, and as he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up. He is calling you." So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go. Your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. Let us pray. Lord, come into our hearts, our minds, and our lives, not only in truth, but in power, that your word may transform us according to your will and by your love. Amen. Okay, here's this sermon that put me to sleep. Here we go. Hang in there. So after 2+ years of ministry, Jesus now had his sights set squarely on Jerusalem. And taking that road leading south from the Galilee, he and his followers eventually passed through the ancient village of Jericho. He was just 17 miles north of Jerusalem. Now the large crowd must have been quite a spectacle as well as a racket as they paraded their way down Main Street. And of course the reason for their excitement was Jesus. Because for a nation immersed in severe poverty, class warfare, oppressed by the Roman government, Jesus represented a glimmer of hope. And even a glimmer was an extremely short supply in those days in Palestine. Now, what had Jesus done to raise their hopes? Well, this former carpenter turned rabbi from Galilee, all he did was heal the sick and exorcise demons and feed thousands and openly challenge the ethics of Rome, breaking down class barriers between the rich and the poor, between the priests and the common folk. Now, at that time in Israel's history, anybody who dared challenge the status quo in any way would draw attention from two sources. It's sort of like Amanda talking about, what if someone came into Edison saying they were the Messiah? Well, they're going to draw attention from a couple different sources. For Jesus, it was this: to the common folk, to the ones who followed in his wake, he was, at the very least, a powerful prophet in the tradition of Elijah and Isaiah and Micah and others. And hey, who knows? He might even be the Messiah. But for those in political and religious power, Jesus was seen as somewhere between a nuisance and a genuine threat. Well, the litmus test of any Messiah could occur in one place and one place alone, and that place was Jerusalem, the home of the one temple for the one God. And that's precisely where Jesus was headed. And that's why the crowds following him were so raucous. You can imagine the buzz, the excitement, the anticipation that would culminate on Palm Sunday. It must have been deafening as the parade roared through Jericho. However, unlike dozens of other towns he'd gone to, it looked like nothing miraculous would happen in Jericho that day. But then, just as Jesus was about to exit the city gate, somehow a lone, desperate voice rose above the commotion. It belonged to a blind beggar sitting alone in the dust on the side of the street. His name was Bartimaeus. We don't know all that much about Bartimaeus other than what's written in the short passage. For instance, we do know that he was blind. We know his father's name was Timaeus because Bar means son of in Hebrew, and Bartimaeus means son of Timaeus. And he was most likely orphaned and alone, because if he had family around, he probably wouldn't have had to take to the street to beg for a living. And as such, he was smack dab on the bottom rung of the social ladder, of the class ladder. For all practical purposes, he was a non-person. He was an untouchable. He was totally dependent on the charity of others, no property, no social standing, and very few rights, if any. In other words, he was just like so many others down through the century. Down through the centuries who pass anonymously through this vale of tears. They die and are soon forgotten. Lost to time. Gone without a trace. Normally that is the fate of the Bartimaeuses of this world. But before we write him off, there was one thing about Bartimaeus. He was pretty sharp. When he heard the crowd shouting, "Jesus of Nazareth," he knew enough to know what that meant. Bartimaeus was blind, you see, but he wasn't deaf. And he certainly wasn't dumb. Sitting there, days on end in the thoroughfare, he had overheard the voices of passers-by making their way south from the Galilee. They spoke of this man Jesus and of his miraculous powers to heal. And now this very miracle worker was going to walk right by him. Suddenly, within earshot was someone who had the ability to restore his sight. And you see, with his sight restored, then Bartimaeus could finally get off the curb, on his feet, off the dole. Bottom line, there was no way that he was going to let this opportunity pass. Bartimaeus possessed only one way to get Jesus' attention. And so, as Mark tells us, he began to shout out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Now, the first thing we ought to notice is this, the name that he used. He didn't call him Jesus of Nazareth, but Jesus, Son of David. Bartimaeus, the blind beggar from the streets of Jericho, knows something for sure that most of those in the crowd had only hoped was true. You see, in Israel, calling someone Son of David could only mean one thing. It was the equivalent of shouting fire in a crowded movie theater. Son of David could only mean Messiah, because the Messiah was to be a descendant of King David. And so with a voice rising above the din of the crowd, Bartimaeus was calling Jesus the Messiah. And what's interesting is the reaction of the crowd. The ones who've been following him, they didn't join their voices in chorus with Bartimaeus. You go, Barte. Yeah, Messiah, that's right. He's the Messiah. You got it. We're with you. Barte. No, they told him to shut the heck up. What are you doing? Right? Mark says, many sternly ordered him to be quiet. Now, why would they do such a thing? Right? Even today, isn't it so typical whenever one whom society deems voiceless actually dares to raise theirs? Bartimaeus represents all those over the centuries who the upper crust tries to put a tight lid on, you see. Those who don't possess the wealth, the connections, the political clout to make their voices heard over the constant commotions of windbags and blowhards. Or there might have been another reason. It might have been because it was so dangerous to call someone Messiah at that time. The Romans, after all, had a nasty reputation for hanging would-be messiahs up on the many crosses that dotted the roadsides. Or maybe it was because the crowd knew Jesus was on a mission. Boldly walking with purpose. They're headed to Jerusalem. We got a big job to do. Right? He had no time to tend to just another roadside panhandler. There were too many great things to do in Jerusalem, and they couldn't wait. So shut up, Bartimaeus, and while you're at it, get a job. But Bartimaeus, Mark tells us, cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." I guess some people in need don't know when to shut up, huh? But Jesus, rather than heading on out of the city gate, stopped dead in his tracks, it says, and said, "Call him here." And I believe that they were somewhat reluctantly here. It says they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up. He's calling you." Ugh, In other words, boy, oh boy, Bartimaeus, you just hit the lottery. The sun must be shining right out of your butt. This is your lucky day. Because he's going to stop what we're going to go do, and he's going to tend to you. Now, you got to love what happens next. Just try to picture this, okay? This is an amazing image. Who knows how long Bartimaeus has sat there on those cramped legs, right? Holding out a cup in the darkness, just waiting to hear a clink, right? Waiting to hear a clink. But now, like a boxer, he just jumps out of his corner, throwing off his robe, it says, right? And he springs to his feet and he struts right on up to Jesus. I have to believe that Jesus must have cracked up a little bit at seeing this person coming at him. And next, Jesus asked Bartimaeus a question that, if we're doing our devotions, we might be tempted to sort of gloss over this question. But it's extremely important. Jesus says, "What do you want me to do for you?" Huh? What do you want me to do for you? The guy's blind. Jesus, Captain Obvious, there's a blind man standing in front of you. What do you think he wants? A new pair of Uggs? But as trifling as Jesus' question appears to be, it actually serves as a model for how we, his followers, ought to treat those 21st century Bartimaeuses who come to us when we're suffering. Too often we simply presume to know what it is that they need. And so before they can open their mouth, we just throw them a few bucks or a bag of food or a ladle of soup. And we feel mighty good about ourselves for doing it. But even though our intentions may be good, such an approach can actually be detrimental to the person we're seeking to serve. That's because its effect is to dehumanize the very person we're trying to help. And like the crowd following Jesus, it's our way to hush the voice of yet another Bartimaeus so we can quickly get on down the road. We have things to do. But to help someone in such a manner, as I said, it may do more harm than good. Most of us on the giving end, most of us, not all of us, but most of us on the giving end can't imagine how gut-wrenching it is for a person to resort to accepting charity. We assume that all we need to do is give the needy something, anything, and they'll just break out the smiles and be so grateful and go on their way. But that is simply not the case. Anyone who's worked with the needy will know this. Put yourself in their place. If you've ever had to accept charity, maybe in the form of money or food or shelter from someone else, it's tough to do. To accept alms from another person, even a close relative. And it's no different for the Bartimaeuses of the world. It ought to fill us with righteous anger when we hear someone say, well, if we increase their food stamps, if we subsidize their housing, the poor won't have any incentive to work for a living. That's junk. I have another word in here, but I decided not to use it. Just use your imaginations. Such thought is the rare exception, not the rule, to find someone who doesn't desire to work and earn their way through life, because so much of who we are and our own self-dignity is tied up in what we do. Jesus understood this. I never remember Jesus going up to someone and saying, well, are you working, or are you seeking work, or are you doing... He doesn't do that. He understood that each person, regardless of their social standing, is entitled to a degree of dignity and respect. And so rather than assume, he asks Bartimaeus, what do you want me to do for you? He accords him the dignity that comes from being a child of God, being made in God's image. And dignity in this case begets dignity. You see, it was because Jesus afforded Bartimaeus his due respect that Bartimaeus returned it by calling Jesus Rabboni, meaning my great one, or simply my teacher. My teacher. There was hardly a more respectful title in the Jewish world than my teacher. Bartimaeus knew all about Jesus of Nazareth. He was a well-known teacher. But when Jesus demonstrated the dignity that others failed to perceive, Jesus became his teacher. And it was then that Bartimaeus asked of Jesus, my teacher, let me see again. And in this emotional meeting of two people who genuinely understood one another, Jesus responded, go. Your faith has made you well. And so the very first thing, just imagine, it's the very first thing that Bartimaeus' eyes beheld was the smiling face of his teacher. What an incredibly joyous meeting it had been between these two sons of God, whose lives unexpectedly intersected in downtown Jericho. But if we leave it all there, we'll have a nice story to remember on our way home. Maybe tell some people we know. A story that may end up like millions of wayside beggars down through the centuries, a story that will become lost and forgotten. But it doesn't have to end that way. In fact, it mustn't end that way. If we are truly the body of Christ, then we must become the body of Christ in all that we do as a church. What if we could somehow gain that reputation? Can you imagine that when people hear the name New Dover United Methodist Church, they respond as Bartimaeus did upon hearing that Jesus was walking through his town? That here is a church that can restore my sight. That here is a church who actually listens to my voice, that respects me. That here is a church that honors my dignity as a child of God. That here is a church where the words, my teacher, are yet heard in all of their compassion and power. Can you imagine if that's how we are perceived? You know, like the crowd following Jesus toward Jerusalem. We can get caught up in what's coming down the road. We're all very excited. It seems like we're always moving towards something. We're excited, we are, about upcoming events like Palm Sunday and Maundy Thursday and Good Friday and Easter. But as we march along through Lent, we cannot be deaf and blind to the Bartimaeuses in our community. We must always keep our ears, our hearts, our minds open to the cries of those alongside the road. And when we hear them, stop and ask as Jesus did, what do you want me to do for you? What do you want us to do for you? And then really pay attention to what they have to say. For just in that little act of listening alone, we will have built a relationship whose foundation is love and whose pillars are empathy and respect and dignity. And saints, guess what happens when we emulate Jesus in such a fashion? We grow as a church. These empty pew seats will be filled. Remember what Jesus said when Bartimaeus' sight was restored? He said, go. Your faith has made you well. But here's the thing. Bartimaeus didn't go anywhere. Mark closes with these words. Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. In other words, Bartimaeus joined in with that crowd of followers and marched with Jesus all the way to the gates of Jerusalem, waving his palms into the clear blue sky that he beheld with his restored vision. Saints, if we're serious about growing this church and strengthening this ministry, the story of Jesus and Bartimaeus makes it clear what we need to do. Because we can have all the plans and projects in the world to look forward to, but if on our way to putting these plans into action, we don't stop and listen to those who are crying out from the wayside, and we are surely doomed to fail. Because if that happens, the one who's blind isn't Bartimaeus. That would be us. Blind and deaf because we wouldn't hear the voice of Bartimaeus in the voices of so many refugees, immigrants, the homeless, the veterans in need, all those who cry out from that very same side of the road. Let's pray.